EC Dub, EC Dub, EC Dub. Man, I always wanted to start a video like that. And welcome to the rise and fall of ECW DVD review. This is a WWE DVD documentary. Came out in 2004, and the whole documentary has, traces the whole trajectory of ECW. It goes over how it got started, most of the superstars, the big stars, the wrestlers in ECW. It goes in great detail, and I'm gonna just go into it. Starts off saying how it got started. It was Eastern Championship Wrestling before, and how Shane Douglas just changed the game. It it used to be a branch of the NWA, which is the National Wrestling Alliance, which was like an old school wrestling promotion that went out of business, but it still had prestige. So that's why the Eastern Championship Wrestling was using the NWA World Title. So Shane Douglas was fighting, wrestling Too Cold Scorpio for the NWA title, and he beat Too Cold Scorpio, and he beat him, and he's like, I'm doing this for the Harley Races, the Ric Flairs, the Hulk Hogan's, the Lou Thez, and then he's like, and they could all kiss my ass. Then he got the ECW title, and he's like, this is who I'm riding with. Thus, ECW Extreme Championship Wrestling was born. And I really liked this documentary. It's pretty long, I'm not going to lie. It's like 2 hours and a half. But if you know nothing about ECW, you will love this documentary. If you know everything about ECW, I still think you will love this documentary. It goes into what made ECW so great. All the great wrestlers, Public Enemy, how they were opponents, and then they became one of the most hardcore tag teams in ECW. Just with the rough, shoot type of wrestling style. With they were rough. Taz, how he came in as the Tasmaniac, and later he changed into a tough guy who would do great promos and submit people later on. Sabu, who was a madman, didn't care about doing physical damage to his own body. Terry Funk, who was, I'm going through all the chapters here. I'm just going through all the chapters. Terry Funk, who was part of the NWA, but he was like 50 years old, but he still contributed to the company. Still wanted to get the young guys over. Goes to the line was crossed, and this was like the introduction to ECW and the great matches that would later become. This match, it went an hour long, and it reached the time limit, and nobody won. It was Terry Funk versus Sabu versus Shane Douglas, and it was just such a good match, man. It brought ECW into the map and as a legit wrestling promotion, because people knew that there was great wrestling being done. That's when Shane Douglas like, man, I should be the champion. I'm the man. I beat the old man and the crazy guy. That's when they were trying to compete with WCW, man. But WCW was taking a lot of their wrestlers at that time. It went through a few feuds. Sandman and Tommy Dreamer. How Tommy Dreamer came in as the nice guy with suspenders, and then he had his rivalry with Sandman, and that's when he became hardcore, because he had a Singapore cane match. And the interesting thing is that the Singapore cane came about because there was a U.S. citizen in Singapore, and he committed a crime over there, and they wanted to cane him as a punishment, and there was a bunch of stuff on the news about that. So that's where the name, at least, Singapore cane, comes from, because they were caning criminals in Singapore. That was their punishment. And Tommy Dreamer got caned like a lot of times by Sandman, and he still got up and he's like, "Thank you, sir. May I have another?" And that's when the fans just cheered, and they started to have empathy for him, and started liking him, not just as a pretty boy, but as a legit wrestler, as a legit hardcore. And we know Sandman, he likes to drink, he likes to beat people up, he likes to smoke cigarettes. Like, a lot of people related to Sandman just as a working man, as a guy that just likes to have fun, be cool. This went extreme. It became extreme, and the Philadelphia fans, the rabid fans, they would shit on a fighter. "You fucked up. You fucked up. You fucked up." And all these chants, they would actually take weapons into the arena to give to the wrestlers. They had bring your own weapons matches where they would use all the fans' weapons during the matches. It goes on to like how they had great technical wrestling. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and then later they brought in the Lucha Libre. Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, Psychosis. So Paul Heyman was bringing everything into the mix. Hardcore wrestling with Tommy Dreamer, Raven, Sandman, Sabu, Terry Funk. Technical wrestling. If you didn't like hardcore wrestling and you were a big fan of technical wrestling, you got Eddie Guerrero, you got Chris Benoit, you got Dean Malenko. If you like you Lucha Libre, he got that too. So he got everything. He had all aspects of wrestling. This is when and also Paul Heyman, such a great wrestling man, he would give everybody the freedom to say and do what they wanted. He gave them the freedom to be themselves, and that's another thing that made ECW so great. That's how you get characters like Raven, who made his own characters, who was like this gothic type who would quote Shakespeare, and he was like, quote the Raven, nevermore. And he would dress like in jean shorts with the leather jacket, doing the Jesus pose. He was just so cool, saying poems from books and all this stuff. Did this thing about how Terry Funk reminded him of his father that used to beat him, that was a drunk. Just the creative minds. This is when Stone Cold, he wasn't Stone Cold yet, he was Steve Austin. But in ECW was where you saw the Stone Cold character come to light. It was the first glimpse of the Stone Cold character that you ever saw. And in ECW, he had some of the greatest promos. He had the Steve Mania, like, "Let me tell you something, brother." He's like, "I don't have what it takes to do it in ECW." And he would be like clenching both his fists, like, "Eric Bischoff, please take me back. Please take me back." But that was only because Paul Heyman allowed him to do that. He allowed him the creative freedom. The creative freedom that wasn't allowed to him in WCW. For those that don't know, Stone Cold Steve Austin was out on an injury in ECW and WCW, and they actually fired him through a FedEx mail. So then that's when Paul Heyman called him. He's like, "Hey, you want to work?" And he's like, "Dude, I can't wrestle." He's like, "It's all good. Come over. We could shoot some promos. It's all good." And and Stone Cold got that. He got that chance in ECW. Even Vince McMahon saw this. Even he saw their popularity growing, ECW popularity growing, and he invited ECW wrestlers to visit the WWF at the time on Raw, so they would invade WWF Raw. That was the original invasion angle, like when it was actually ECW invading Raw. And you had Sabu, Taz, invading Raw, beating up security, beating up wrestlers, then running away. That was the original invasion angle. And you got Vince and Eric Bischoff. Like, Eric Bischoff's like, "Dude, why? I don't understand why that Vince McMahon would do that." At first, I was like upset at Eric. I'm like, "Dude, Eric Bischoff doesn't contribute anything to this." But it makes sense because he was his competitors, and he really disliked ECW, as Paul Heyman really disliked WCW. You could tell by the way he talks. And though the ECW fans hated WWF and WCW, they hated WCW even more because they were the first ones to take a lot of the wrestlers like Eddie Guerrero, like Dean Malenko, like Rey Mysterio, like they even took Raven and they took Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit. So they're the ones that took a lot of their good wrestlers. And Eric Bischoff's like, it's not hijacking. It's just like I'm gonna pay more money for this wrestler. If he wants to come to me, I'm not making him come to me. And that makes sense. Even Paul Heyman's like, it's a smart business move. But he says, I wish that he would just say that he hijacked them from me. That's all he wants. But Eric Bischoff, of course, isn't gonna say that. He's like, Vince McMahon took wrestlers from WCW. Is he hijacking? And to that, I say yes. Vince McMahon did hijack wrestlers from WCW and from ECW. So I do not buy Eric Bischoff's excuse. It goes on to Taz coming back from the broken neck. No longer the Tasmaniac, but just the badass that I said before. Oh, then there's some controversy. Sandman versus Raven. The great rivalry that they had. I'm just going down the list, guys. I'm just saying. The great rivalry. Raven actually took Sandman's son. He didn't kidnap him or nothing, but he had, Sandman's son like wanting to be him, hanging out with Raven, and he's like, Dad, you're a drunk. Raven's my hero now. And he started hanging out with Raven and hugging Raven, dressing like him, doing the Jesus pose just like Raven, and it got to the point where Raven and his crew, the Flock, beat up the Sandman, and they literally crucified him. They got like 2 4x4s or bigger blocks of wood, and then they tied him up, put a crown of barbed wire around his head, and crucified him. And at that time, Kurt Angle was there, and Kurt Angle wanted to be. Kurt Angle was gonna join ECW, but when he saw that, I guess he's a hardcore Catholic or whatever, and he's like, I do not want anything to do with this company. If you even show me on TV, I will sue you. You could speak to my attorney. So it got a lot of controversy, and that's why Kurt Angle wasn't in ECW. That would have been really cool, Kurt Angle in ECW, but it didn't happen, and Raven had to come out like he's like, I'm sorry to those who got offended for me using this religious iconography. He just used so good words, but you could tell he wasn't sorry at all. He was not sorry at all. That's the controversy with them. It goes on to ECW trying to broaden their horizons and doing their first pay-per-view, which was in 1997. It was called Barely Legal. This was their first pay-per-view. One thing that I wish they had that they didn't is Paul Heyman's speech before this pay-per-view. It was like, you need to tell everybody who never believed in us, fuck you, you're wrong. That's a really cool speech. You could see it in the documentary. Came out in 1999. I forgot what it's called. If I remember it in this review, I will bring it up, or I will leave it in the description, but I can't remember it. I wish that was on, but it came up, and then it showed the pay-per-view where it had all these good storylines, like RVD versus Lance Storm. RVD was mad because he didn't even have a match coming into Barely Legal, but since Lance Storm's opponent, I think it was Chris Candido, he got injured or something, RVD had to step up, and then he beat Lance Storm, and he's like, man, this is a disrespect. Yes, I'm selling out, but I sold out because I sold out even being here, because I didn't even have a match, and I'm still here, and I'm still the best. And you had Taz versus Sabu. This was one of the best rivalries in wrestling, I believe, because this rivalry was building up for a whole year. And it wasn't forced. Excuse me. It wasn't forced like The Rock versus John Cena was for that whole year rivalry. They didn't touch. They just did. They didn't even really do promos. It was just tension building where they would share the same ring, or for one reason or the other, they just never touched. And this was them touching. This could have main evented the show, but the main event, Sandman versus Terry Funk versus Stevie Richards in a 3-way dance. But there's more. The winner of that 3-way dance would face Raven. And this match was epic. You had ladders, you had a whole bunch of stuff. You had Stevie Richards getting eliminated first, and then Terry Funk winning from a moonsault. You're talking about like a 50-plus-year-old man jumping off the ladder, doing a moonsault onto Sandman. After that brutal match, all bloodied and all, he had to face Raven, the young buck who was the heavyweight champion. And Raven was beating his ass because he said that Terry Funk reminded him of his drunk father and that he was going to teach him a lesson. And there was just an epic match. And you had Terry Funk winning via roll-up. And it just looked like a beautiful moment. Terry Funk all red all over the face. And just cheering with the fans with the ECW World Heavyweight title. And just everybody, EC-Dub, EC-Dub, EC-Dub. It was just a beautiful moment. And they said that if the show lasted 3 more seconds, that 3 seconds after the pay-per-view had ended, that the lights went out, that everything went off. And they said if the show lasted 3 more seconds, that the feed would have went off. And that's just crazy. It was destiny. That means it was destiny for that to happen, for everyone to see that. It goes on to people leaving, like the Raven, and going to WCW. And Jerry Lawler actually coming to ECW. I think this was one of the most disrespectful things Jerry Lawler has done. Even though he's a great heel, he was a great heel because I really hated him. And he went into the ECW, and with the help of RVD and Sabu, he was just beating up the whole. Also, Jim Cornette was there with his tennis racket, but with the help of RVD and Sabu, he was just beating up the whole locker room. But that's not the disrespectful part. He got Tommy Dreamer and just kept hitting him with the Singapore cane, and one of those cane shots, he hit him in the balls, dude. He hit him in the nuts, and that actually knocked him out. And the only thing that woke him up was getting hit by a tennis racket by Jim Cornette. And then he later went to the hospital for that, and he had to get fluid taken out of that testicle that it got hit. Like, it was some serious thing. He said Jerry Lawler apologized, but I thought that wasn't cool at all. I mean, he could have went and invaded. That's a cool angle. Invasion angles are cool, but what he did to Tommy Dreamer, definitely not cool. The ECW was a low budget wrestling promotion. They didn't have the big money for the to get big stars like Hulk Hogan, or have big things like fireworks and all this stuff, pyrotechnics. They couldn't do that. So what Paul Heyman was just so great at doing was accentuating the positive and hiding the negative. Yes, he had a locker room full of guys that looked like they just came out of prison, man. A lot of short dudes, right, that look like regular people. But he did everything possible to make them look so badass, so cool. Some guy can't wrestle, you got promos. If you can wrestle, you're going to go out there and be having great wrestling. Yes, they didn't have great cameras, they didn't have pyrotechnics, but they had great wrestling, they had great promos, they had great storylines. They had storylines that made you feel, and that's what made ECW great. Not that they had all this money. In fact, wrestlers had to take roles in the business aspects, like East, like Tom, like I'm sorry, Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon had to be on the phone or packaging clothes and shirts and DVDs and all that. Stevie Richards was also the phone like receptionist. So they did everything possible to have ECW thrive because they love the promotion, and each one contributed not only with their wrestling but also by helping the company in the business aspects itself. This is when you start having ECW, WCW, and WWE starting doing their own line of attitude. And Vince McMahon's like, no, we've always had attitude. Bullshit, man. Bull. Because no ECW, no attitude. You don't have an attitude era. Who knows what wrestling would be today if it wasn't for ECW, at least in the United States, because they brought that line of hardcore. That's when WCW and WWE started taking superstars or wrestlers from ECW and started doing these awesome matches that they actually had. So I don't think that would have been possible without ECW. It goes on to the Dudleys, who were a little bit later than these guys. I'm skipping some chapters, but I'm saying most what it's about, right? The Dudleys, they were such a great tag team, such great heels. Heels is the bad guys in wrestling, and they were hated by most. You got Bubba Ray Dudley doing great promos like, look at this faggot in the front row wearing a Hawaiian shirt, just calling out people. They would cause riots. Devon Dudley said that they would get so mad that they would wait in the back and then be like, what's up? Calling them out. Hey, now that the cameras aren't rolling, what's up? That's how good of a tag team they were. But too bad for the ECW. They just couldn't keep it. Financially, they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't afford these guys because Paul Heyman, he had the best mind for wrestling. He's one of the greatest minds of wrestling ever. But he just didn't have the business mind. You had a lot of these guys getting bounced checks, them cashing it in and it not being worth anything. And Paul Heyman was just not a good businessman. It comes down to it. They just could not afford to stay, and they got to deal with TNA. And when they got the deal with TNA, that's when the Dudley Boys started to leave. Left. That's when the Dudley Boys left, and that's when Taz leaves. You got their three biggest superstars, the biggest draws in the company, and they leave to the WWF. You're gonna tell me that doesn't affect your company? And then you got TNA. That's TNN. I'm sorry. It just had a bad business deal with ECW. It's like they didn't respect wrestling at all because they didn't promote ECW. Only during the program did they promote ECW. So there was no commercials or any advertisements about ECW unless you were watching ECW. How is a program like that going to thrive? How is it going to get viewers? This is when all these guys got so mad. Paul Heyman just upset, and he made a promo, shoot, and he even made the little gun in his hand, and he's like, network, I dare you to throw me off the air. Just a network that didn't respect them, that they didn't even promote them at all, like I said. And Paul Heyman knew that they were just a guinea pig because they were in talks with the WWF to have them put Raw on TNN. And that's what happened. Raw was on TNN after that for a while, until it became the new TNN, and then it became Spike. But Raw was on TNN after ECW. So they were the guinea pigs. They were only there to test the waters. They never respected them. And their time ended, their deal ended, the horrible deal with TNN ended, and they just could not Paul Heyman could not get another network to sign ECW. They're saying that it failed because of the violence. They couldn't get advertisers. Paul Heyman says that the only reason they failed was because they couldn't get another network. And that's a simplistic answer, yes, but I agree with whatever all of them say. Actually, they all have a point of truth. ECW was for a niche audience. Only the hardcore wrestling fans love to watch that. You can't take it wasn't a place that you could take your kid or your wife to. It was not a place, but it was a very fun promotion, a very good promotion that is still talked about today, that had great fans, great wrestling, great storylines that are still talked, and produced some of the best wrestlers alive ever. You know, like Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio and Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. They gave them the first chance to wrestle in the United States on a big stage, because at that time they were the third biggest wrestling company in the United States, behind WWF and WCW. So ECW was officially dead when Paul Heyman joined the WWF, and Paul Heyman's like, dude, I just couldn't afford not to. Like, I'm not gonna live in denial. And that makes sense too. Like, you can't just be, sobbing over ECW dying. He had to move forward, and that was his way. They could say he sold out, and in a way he did, to a company that was trying to bring him down. But WWF helped ECW, but ECW helped WWF too, because Vince McMahon, I know it, he was trying to bring that hardcore audience to WWF, because they were down in the ratings too. You wanna talk about wrestling like a 95, 94 in WWF? It was garbage. You have King Mabel, and the only good things about wrestling or WWF at that time were Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, and Mankind. Those were the only redeeming qualities of the WWF in that time. So Vince McMahon has nowhere to talk about like, oh, I don't know why I did it. Yeah, you do, dude. You wanted to get that niche audience because they were so rabid and so passionate about wrestling. You wanted to convert those wrestling fans because they were the ones that were gonna convert other people into your product. That's why Vince McMahon did business with ECW, because he wanted their fans, their passion. That's why. And that's the legacy of ECW, man. This is a must-have. I recommend buying this DVD, because it is just so good. This documentary is so good. You also A+. You also have this is a 2-disc set. You also have the Pitbulls versus Raven and Stevie Richards 2 out of 3 in a dog collar match. It's a good match. Not the best. Rey Mysterio versus Psychosis. You know those guys 2 out of 3. You know those guys gonna put on a show. Definitely recommend watching that. Mikey Whipwreck versus the Sandman. That's a good match. It's for the ECW Championship. It's cool to watch how they did ladder matches. It's not to grab the belt. The ladder's just a prop. It's just a weapon. Too Cold Scorpio versus Sabu for the World Television title. Decent match. Tommy Dreamer versus Raven. This is the one where Tommy Dreamer finally gets his revenge. These guys had a great feud, but the part that made their feud interesting and really good was that Tommy Dreamer never beat Raven, but this is the match that he beat Raven, because Raven was gonna leave to WCW. And this match actually has alternate commentary with Tommy Dreamer and Jonathan Coachman, which is very funny and very interesting as well. You got Taz versus Bam Bam Bigelow for the ECW World Championship. This also has alternate commentary with Taz and Michael Cole. That's the match where Taz is driven through the ring by Bam Bam when he applies the chokehold, and then he just throws himself back and they go through the ring. That's a really cool match too. Match of the DVD: Rob Van Dam versus Jerry Lynn for the television title. This match is the match of the DVD. Really good, high flying. This was a time where Rob Van Dam was, of course, the whole effing show with the thumbs and all, but Jerry Lynn started calling himself the new effing show. So they had a rivalry going on, and this is a very good match. That match is like 30 minutes long, and it's just really good. It also has commentary by Rob Van Dam and Jonathan Coachman. So both of the DVDs are must-haves. No, it's just one DVD. It comes with 2 discs, but the matches are really good as well. It also comes with a few promos, but definitely a recommended, a must-have if you're a wrestling fan. I truly recommend it. Thank you for watching. If you're still watching, I didn't mean for this to be this long, but that's the quality of this DVD, guys. Trust me. Anyway, thanks for watching once again, and please comment your thoughts if you've seen this. What do you think about this DVD? And don't forget to subscribe. Peace.